Jakarta, January 9th, 2021. The city seems to be drowning in warmth and noise. The air is dense, saturated with moisture, saturated with the smell of wet asphalt, diesel, and salt brought from the Java Sea. The monsoon rain has been falling since the morning, without stopping, as if the sky decided to wash away everything that was on the ground. Large drops trickle down the terminal windows, turning the airport lights into blurred streaks of light. Against the background of booming flight announcements, jet engines roar like giant animals somewhere outside the window. Soekarno-Hatta Airport lives its usual life. Tractors and maintenance vehicles are moving next to the ramps, and drivers in yellow vests are shouting over the noise of the rain. The flashing beacons of airplanes are reflected on the platform. Red, blue, white, they twinkle in a haze of water, like a city underwater. Everything here is subject to routine, schedules, commands. For thousands of employees, it's just another shift. For dozens of planes, it's just another flight. But under one of the canopies, in the parking lot at Terminal D, there is an airplane that is destined to make history. A white and blue Boeing 737-500 with registration number PKCLC. Its livery is the colors of Sriwijaya Air. Refueling has already been completed on board, and the crew is undergoing final checks. The number SJ182, Jakarta, Pontianak, lights up on the flight board. For most, it's just a domestic flight. An hour and a half in the sky. The routine way home. Passengers board in the rain. A young couple holds a baby under a towel. An elderly man helps a woman with her luggage. Someone is shooting a short video on their phone. Drops on the glass, the sound of turbines, the bright inscription, Sriwijaya Air. People are busy with their own thoughts, calls, messages, rush. No one is looking at the sky. It's too cloudy. No one thinks that every such trip can be the last. The cockpit is quiet. The commander is Afwan, 50, 4 years old, former military, more than 17,000 flight hours. He's the kind of guy who doesn't talk too much. His movements are precise, his gaze is calm, and his voice is husky and confident. On the right is the co-pilot, Diego Mamahi, 34 years old, more than 5,000 flight hours. Young but experienced, he was used to trusting his commander and his equipment. There is no place for randomness in their work. The control cards are open, the systems are checked one by one, the temperature sensors are normal, and the pressure in the hydraulic systems is stable. The fuel indicators are even, and the turbine thrust is balanced. Everything looks perfect. Outside, the rain hits the fuselage with a steady sound, like a metronome striking the seconds before takeoff. The mechanic reports on the radio that everything is ready. The flight attendants take their seats. The commander makes the last entry in the log. Takeoff is allowed after clearing the lane. The plane comes alive. The panels in the cockpit light up, and the electronic screens turn green. Sriwijaya 182, ready for pushback and startup. Pushback approved, runway 25 right. On the apron, the tow truck begins to slowly pull the plane back. The lanterns are reflected on the wet asphalt, as if traces of light go behind it. People in vests are waving their chopsticks, signaling clear. Steam escapes from the exhaust of the turbines, instantly dissolving into the rain. It all looks hypnotic. The machine, weighing more than 40 tons, moves with the precision of a surgical operation. While the crew is taxiing to the runway, the commander and co-pilot are talking through the procedures. 15 flaps. 15 flaps have been installed. Takeoff thrust is set. Everything is happening as it should be. Everything is familiar to the point of automatism. Not a single detail gets out of the usual rhythm, but somewhere behind the glass of the cabin, there is a thick, gray haze. There is no horizon or sun beyond it. Only water and electrical discharges in the distance. A storm is brewing in the sky over Java that no one will see with their eyes. The control tower confirms, Sriwijaya 182, cleared for takeoff, runway 25 right. Cleared for takeoff, Sriwijaya 182. Forward thrust levers. The CFM56 turbines begin to howl. The sound changes from a low hum to a whistle, then to a roar that breaks through the thickness of the rain. The plane shudders as it accelerates along the wet runway. The headlights break through the wall of water. 120 knots. 140. The commander says briefly, V1, rotate. The steering wheel is smoothly moving towards itself. The nose rises, the wheels lift off the ground. Jakarta remains under the wings, a huge city glistening with rain, drowning in clouds. At this moment, the camera seems to lift off the ground, along with the plane. The moment when the rumble of the engines merges with the thunder. When there is an ocean of light under the wings and a dense grayness that seems endless above the head. The plane is gaining altitude, hiding in the clouds. Everything is going perfectly. No alarms, no deviations. The dispatcher's note: Flight 182 has left the airport area. People in the cabin are relaxing. Someone is taking off their seatbelt. Someone is taking a nap. It's the same as always. One more day. One more flight. And only behind the scenes, barely audible, thunder rumbles again, like a short warning that no one heard. The rain doesn't stop. He taps the fuselage steadily, stubbornly, as if testing the patience of the machine. The air on the runway is shaking from the thrust of the engines. The city behind us is flooded with light, orange patches of streets, reflections of headlights, billboards drowning in a gray haze. Jakarta looks like a living organism, throbbing, heavy, sleepy. Everything is ready in the cabin. Commander Afwan checks the latest parameters. Engine speed is 89%, exhaust gas temperature is normal. The co-pilot monitors the speed. Their voices sound calm, jerky, without emotion. There is something almost mechanical about it, a habit developed over the years. Every word has meaning, every step is a ritual. Set takeoff thrust. Takeoff thrust set. Check speed. Speed alive. The hum gets louder. The humid air trembles with the force of the turbines. The plane accelerates along the wet runway. The numbers on the dashboard light up. The hands creep up. The light reflects off the drops on the glass. In a matter of seconds, the speed reaches 150 knots. V1, rotate. The commander pulls the wheel. The nose of the plane lifts, and the huge machine smoothly lifts off the ground. For a split second, the whole world seems to freeze. Only the sound of rain on the hull, then a sharp jolt, and Jakarta remains below, under a layer of gray clouds. 14:36 local time. Sriwijaya Air Flight 182 leaves the ground. There is a milky wall behind the portholes. The whole sky seems dense, solid. No sun, no horizon, no sea line, just the grayness and the endless sound of the wind. The plane is gaining altitude. The dispatcher on the tower monitors the mark on the radar. Everything is normal. Sriwijaya 182, climb to flight level 130, left heading 075. The crew's response sounds without the slightest alarm. Left 075, climb 130, Sriwijaya 182. The radio clicks, the connection is cut off. There are no deviations. In the cockpit, the pilots relax. Wet palms finally come off the levers. Afwan shifts his shoulders, looks out the gray window. He was used to this kind of sky. It's not a thunderstorm, just a dense, moist mass that needs to be broken through. Diego checks the course and altitude and marks the value on the navigation screen with his finger. Everything is under control. The autopilot is on. The plane is moving smoothly. The turbines roar at a constant frequency, creating a sense of calm. Even the rain is no longer audible, only the muffled hum of metal. But visually, it's almost darkness. There is nothing around. There was no cloud cover, no ray of light, just a cloudy white curtain where heaven and earth merged into one. At such moments, a person completely trusts the devices. All the pilot sees are numbers and lines on the screen. At the level of sensations, the plane seems to be standing still, although it is actually rising at a speed of 500 kilometers per hour. In the cabin, the flight attendants begin their rounds. The passengers are silent. Someone is yawning, someone is flipping through their phone, someone is just looking out the window, where there is nothing but gray. A little girl clings to her mother, asking when they will see the sky. The mother smiles. Soon. The control tower is receiving an update from the radar. The SJ182 marker is steadily moving along the route. Everything looks perfect. But the higher the plane rises, the stronger the pressure of water and wind is felt. At an altitude of about 3,000 meters, the first light tremors appear, signs of turbulence. This is common, but it still makes pilots pay more attention to their instruments. The traction control maintains the power of the engines. On the panel, two levers move synchronously, as if connected by an invisible thread. One is responsible for the left engine, the other for the right. So far, both are working perfectly. The commander quickly checks the values. The speed of the left engine is 84%. The speed of the right engine is 84.1%. The difference is minimal, within the tolerance. It's all clear. But somewhere inside one of the electric drives, a tiny deviation begins to occur. Inconspicuous, almost inconspicuous. The electronic signal gets lost, and the left throttle lever slowly, almost imperceptibly, moves back. On the panel, this movement is so microscopic that the pilots cannot see it with their eyes. Everything seems the same. The indicators are flat, the exchange rate is stable, the autopilot automatically compensates for the deviation by turning the rudder slightly. This is a normal reaction. The system does everything to maintain a straight flight. Nothing unusual happens during the first few minutes. The pilots continue the conversation. I see a thunderstorm front ahead. Let's go a little to the left. 075 confirm. Accepted. Light begins to flash behind the glass. Flashes of lightning somewhere in the distance. But this is a common pattern for the tropics. Below, under the clouds, the torrential rain is still drumming on the sea. Fishermen look at the sky, where the rumble of jet engines can be heard through the clouds. No one suspects that this sound will disappear in a few minutes. So far, everything is calm. On the dispatcher's radars, flight Sriwijaya 182 is moving strictly on course. They record an altitude of 10,400 feet. The course is stable. The autopilot is already struggling with a slight thrust asymmetry, which the pilots are not aware of yet. The difference between the left and right engines is growing, 3% then 5%. It's not much, but it's enough for the plane to turn slightly to the left. While the autopilot compensates for the deviation, the commander and co-pilot continue to monitor the weather. Their attention is focused ahead, where lightning draws the horizon. The dispatcher's voice is heard over the radio again. Sriwijaya 182. Maintain flight level 130. Maintain 130, Sriwijaya 182. This will be their last confirmation of the connection. They don't know that under their fingers, on the panel, the traction control is already slowly losing synchronization. That the lever of the left engine trembled a little. That this millimeter of movement would be the starting point for a catastrophic chain of events. So far, everything looks perfect. The plane is en route, the automation is working, the crew is calm. There's a straight line on the radars and silence in the cockpit. It is this silence, full of trust in technology, that will become the boundary between order and chaos. At an altitude of about 10,000 feet, everything seems perfect. The autopilot steers the plane smoothly, the indicators are consistently green, the noise of the turbines is smooth and monotonous. For pilots, it's a background sound, like a metronome for a musician. They don't consciously listen to him, they just know that everything is going as it should. But somewhere deep under the control panels, inside the metal case, under the pedals and levers, a deviation begins to develop, so insignificant that it does not cause a single alarm. The electronic drive of the traction control receives false data from a potentiometer, a small sensor that measures the position of the lever. The system decides that the left engine is producing excessive power and begins to smoothly pull the lever back. The movement is almost invisible, 1.5 millimeters. But at a speed of 700 kilometers per hour, this is enough to upset the balance. The right engine continues to operate at normal speed, 84% thrust. The left one drops to 80, then to 78. The difference is small, but it is precisely such minor discrepancies that cause the aircraft to slowly turn towards a weaker engine. The autopilot is responding. There is a rule laid down inside his algorithms. If the plane deviates from the course, the rudder must compensate for this. The system makes a micro correction, turns the steering wheel to the right to balance the thrust. This happens automatically, without the participation of pilots. The exchange rate is stabilizing. No alarms, no alarms. The plane seems to continue flying in a straight line, but the compensation is getting stronger by the second. The rudder has already been deflected almost to the limit, and the automation keeps the position on the edge of its capabilities. The camera seems to be moving closer to the dashboard. On the digital screen is a set of numbers. Heading 075. Altitude 10,900 ft. The small arrow of the course trembles, as if hesitantly hesitating between two directions. At the bottom, on the thrust indicator, the values of the left and right engines are diverging more and more, but the numbers are too small to notice. There is a steady ventilation noise in the cabin. The pilots are silent. The commander looks ahead. The co-pilot checks the forecast for the storm front. Against the background of a faint hum, only a rare toggle switch is heard, a sound that for some reason seems too loud in this silence. The seconds drag on. Everything is still calm on board. But the viewer already knows that inside this calmness, there is a hidden mechanism that no longer obeys anyone. The autopilot, struggling with thrust asymmetry, tilts the plane more and more to the right. This is the only way to keep the trajectory straight. The roll is growing, 10 degree, 15 degree, 18 degree, 19 degree. This is the limit for the system. Further, the autopilot does not have the right to adjust the angle, so as not to destroy the aerodynamic stability. He's trying to get the balance back, but he can't. At this point, there is a barely perceptible shift. The left engine continues to lose power. The right side pushes harder, and the plane, despite the efforts of automation, begins to move slowly to the left. Inside the cabin, everything seems the same. Even a slight displacement feels not like a problem, but like minor turbulence. But if the pilots had looked at the thrust indicator, they would have seen that the difference was already more than 8%. For two CFM56 turbines, this is a huge gap. While they are bypassing the storm clouds, the dispatcher sees how the SJ182 dot on the radar begins to deviate from the route line. Insignificant, just a few degrees. He thinks the crew is just adjusting course to avoid a thunderstorm. The plane looks calm from the outside. A small blue and white silhouette glides through the clouds. But inside there is a struggle between the automaton and physics. The wind is pressing, the wings receive different loads. The autopilot keeps the course on the edge, like a tightrope walker balancing over a precipice. A minute passes. The difference in thrust reaches 12%. The left engine produces 76%, the right 88%. The autopilot can no longer compensate for this completely. Internal algorithms detect the overload. The car is trying to regain its balance, but the inertia is too great. The plane is tilting to the left. Nothing has changed in the cabin. No indicator sounds an alarm. "It's okay," Afwan says, looking at the weather monitor. "It looks like the front is moving north." "Got it," Diego says. He does not see that the small blue line of the course on the GPS screen is slowly deviating from the planned route. Everything happens slowly, smoothly, unnoticed. But that's exactly how the loss of control begins in aviation. Not with an explosion, not with a flash, but with a barely noticeable deviation that grows by the second. There is a barely audible echo in the background. The radar dispatcher is calling again. "Sriwijaya 182, Jakarta Control. Confirm heading 075. Pause. "Sriwijaya 182, Jakarta Control. Do you copy?" Silence. The plane had already gone almost 15 degrees to the left of the route. The speed is stable, about 284 knots, but the position is becoming less stable. The rudder is deflected to the limit. The autopilot is not coping. At this moment, the instrument panel inside the cabin begins to vibrate due to resonance and uneven thrust. The small hands on the mechanical indicators are shaking. This sound, an almost imperceptible crack of metal, is a harbinger of the fact that the machine is no longer able to hold the system. The camera seems to freeze on the commander's face. His eyes are directed forward, but there is already a slight wariness in them. Something's wrong. He doesn't hear any warnings, but he senses a change in the car's behavior. Slight vibration. Barely noticeable difference in response to the steering wheel. "I don't like it," he says, frowning slightly. "The weather?" the co-pilot asks. "No, the feeling." He instinctively checks the course, 075 as it should be. But the numbers on the screen change with a delay of just 1 or 2 seconds, and this confuses perception. Meanwhile, the autopilot continues to struggle. His drives are overloaded. At some point, they simply freeze in their current position, keeping the roll on the edge of possibilities. The system can no longer adjust the course. The whole burden is now on the pilots. But they don't know yet that the automation has already given up. A small yellow indicator flashes on the autopilot display. It warns about the desynchronization of thrust. The sound of the alarm is quiet, short, barely audible over the noise of the engines. Maybe they just didn't hear. The audience knows more than the crew. The camera zooms in on the dashboard. The arrow of the left engine's thrust indicator drops a little lower, while the arrow of the right engine remains the same. The difference is already critical. The plane is on course, but its internal balance is disrupted. Everything still seems normal, but the countdown has already started inside the systems. This is the moment when automation is inferior to physics for the first time. When the iron stops obeying the numbers. When the silence in the cabin becomes ominous because there is no control in it anymore. On Jakarta's radar, the dispatcher sees how the marker of Sriwijaya Air Flight 182 suddenly begins to drift to the side. A little bit at first, just a few degrees. Then the course line bends sharply, as if someone has pulled it over the edge. The dispatcher presses the communication button. Sriwijaya 182, Jakarta Control, confirm heading. Silence. He repeats the call, louder, almost irritated. Sriwijaya 182, Jakarta Control, do you copy? Again, nothing. The green dot suddenly stops on the screen. After a second, she starts to fall. At that moment, the tension in the cockpit had not yet turned into panic. Afwan, the commander, notices the roll almost 40 degrees to the left. It's not normal. He immediately turns off the autopilot. A short click of the switch, a dull relay sound. The plane responds instantly. Without automation, it no longer tries to stabilize itself. A sharp push throws them to the left. The whole body feels like the centrifugal force pulls to the side. Afwan pulls the steering wheel, instinctively, to the left, to where the car is already collapsing. It's an instant reaction, a pilot's reflex. Level up. But that's exactly the mistake. When the roll exceeds 30 degrees, the control reverses in body perception. What appears to be, to the left, for the plane, is even deeper into the rubble. The steering wheel goes to itself, and the plane seems to resist. The left wing falls down, the right wing rises. Gravity mixes with inertia. Everything that is not fixed in the cockpit flies to the side. A map, a glass, a notebook, everything comes off the surface. The roll is too big, the co-pilot shouts. The voice is high-pitched, tense, but still within the professional tone. I have control, Afwan answers. He pulls harder. But due to spatial disorientation, the direction of the effort becomes the opposite. The plane is responding late. At this moment, the alarm goes off. A sharp piercing sound, bank angle, warns the system about excessive roll. Behind it is another signal. Altitude. Altitude. The height is falling. On the vertical speed indicator, the arrow goes down. 2,000 feet per minute. 3. 4. The plane crashes, but the crew is still trying to keep it in the air. There is a white wall of clouds outside. It's impossible to tell which way is up and which way is down. No horizon, no sea line, just chaos. Spatial disorientation is an insidious condition. The brain stops trusting the eyes. The inner ear sends false signals. The pilot feels that he is flying straight, although he is actually spinning in a spiral. Look at the instruments, Diego shouts, but his voice is drowned in the noise. Afwan pulls the steering wheel towards himself. In the cabin, the vibration increases. The hum of the turbines becomes high, as if the strained metal strings are about to burst. The speed indicator is rising. The plane is accelerating, not rising. The left engine is still running at reduced power. The right one pushes harder. Because of this, the plane doesn't just fall. It twists around its axis. Every moment brings us closer to the moment when aerodynamics will no longer obey physics. The dispatcher downstairs calls again. Sriwijaya 182, Jakarta Control, do you read? His voice is calm, but there is already a hint of anxiety in it. Next to him, a colleague looks at the screen. The height drops sharply. 10,000 feet, 8,000. After a few seconds, 5,000. In the cockpit, the pilots already realize that something has gone irreversibly wrong. Afwan tries to compensate for the fall by deflecting the steering wheel to the right. But the plane is turned almost 90 degrees. In this situation, all the usual laws of management stop working. When he pulls the steering wheel towards himself, the nose actually goes down. "Roll right! Roll right!" the co-pilot shouts. The commander is trying, but the inertia is already too strong. The air roars outside. Passengers, pressing into their seats, feel the floor give way under their feet. The plane is falling. The speed exceeds 350 knots. A torn cloud layer flashes past the windows. Below them is the dark surface of the Java Sea. The voice warning system is triggered one after the other. Bank angle, overspeed, pull up, pull up. The voices from the speakers are mixed into one alarm stream. The cabin fills with electronic screeching. Afwan screams, "I'm taking control." Diego answers, "Roll right, Captain. Too steep." And at that moment, everything is happening too fast. The roll reaches 90 degrees. The plane turns almost on its side. The nose is lowered. The vertical speed goes beyond the 10,000 ft per minute mark. Everything is flying in the cabin. The panels are shaking. Small details are getting out of place. The wind blows through the cracks, creating a low, long-drawn howl. "Altitude, altitude," repeats the machine. But it's already useless. There is almost no height. Outside, fishermen see a fiery flash erupt from the clouds. A huge silver shadow falls down, leaving a trail of steam and rain. Everything happens in seconds. The last sound in the cockpit is the co. Pilots shout, "Too much bank!" The hum of the air turns into a whistle, then a blow. The green marker of flight SJ182 disappears on Jakarta radars. The dispatcher presses the communication button several times. "Sriwijaya 182, Jakarta Control, do you read?" There is no response. He looks at the screen. Nothing. Emptiness. It's raining over the Java Sea again. The sea is calm, as if nothing had happened. But after a few minutes, oil stains and debris will appear on its surface. The silence after the impact lasts longer than necessary. So much so that it seems as if the atmosphere itself is frozen, trying to comprehend what just happened. The Java Sea. Early evening. The rain is abating, but the air is still thick and heavy. The waves are calm, with only a few crests breaking in the wind. The sky above the horizon is gray as lead. Somewhere in the distance, a quiet rumble of thunder. A small fishing boat is bobbing on the water a few kilometers from Tyson Bay. Two men pick up the nets. There is only sea and rain around. And suddenly there was a sound. Low, muffled, like a distant explosion underwater. A second of silence, then a second, sharper, closer. They turn around. Where the sky merges with the water, there is a brief glimmer, as if lightning struck directly into the sea. A few seconds later, a rumble comes from there. Short, hoarse, unreal. Then silence again. Just the wind. Only the sound of rain. One of the fishermen crosses himself. The other, without saying a word, turns on the engine and steers the boat to the place where the sound was. 15 minutes later, they find themselves in the middle of a strange spot on the water. The wind brings the smell of kerosene. Pieces of plastic, scraps of fabric, and what looks like a piece of cladding are drifting on the surface. Oil stains glisten on the waves, turning the sea into a mirror, broken into fragments. They understand. This is not fishing trash. It's a plane. The message arrives on the shore at about 15 wing. Fishermen notice debris north of Jakarta, presumably a plane. 10 minutes later, the sirens at the naval base begin to wail. The operation begins, which will be called one of the largest in the history of Indonesia. By evening, the area was cordoned off. Navy ships, Coast Guard boats, and rescue vessels are heading to the crash site. Helicopters are circling in the sky, their searchlights cutting through the darkness, reflecting in the black water. There are divers, engineers, and journalists on the decks. The first finds appear quickly. Fragments of the fuselage, parts of the seats, life jackets. One of the soldiers takes out a piece of blue skin from the water. The Sriwijaya Air logo is visible on it. The national news broadcast is filled with disturbing headlines. A plane has disappeared over the Java Sea. Flight SJ182 is out of contact. Maybe a crash. Reporters are talking live, their faces illuminated by floodlights, and the sea is raging behind them. Phrases are cut off. Microphones catch the howl of the wind. One of the journalists says in a trembling voice, "It looks like we've found pieces of the hull. They're fresh. They still smell of fuel." At the port of Jakarta, people gather at the terminal. Relatives of the passengers, pale faces, phones in their hands. Someone is calling over and over, listening to the empty rings. Someone is just sitting, looking out the window at the dark sky. The news screens show coordinates. Northwest of Jakarta, 11 nautical miles, depth about 23 meters. That's where all the forces are now directed. On the first day, the weather deteriorates again. The sea is rough, rain is flooding the decks. But the search doesn't stop. Buoys, locators, and underwater drones are dropped onto the water. Their task is to find two devices hidden somewhere under a layer of silt. Flight recorders. Those black boxes. Pingers are ultrasonic beacons embedded in the recorder housings that emit signals with a frequency of 37.5 kilohertz. They turn on automatically when in contact with water. In theory, they can be heard from a distance of up to 3 kilometers. In practice, if the bottom is muddy, the signal goes out faster. The sonar operators sit unblinking, staring at the screens. They show a black and white hazy picture. Spots, shadows, contours. Every sound, every splash is recorded and translated into coordinates. After 3 hours of searching, the first distinct signal is heard. A short, metallic tick. It repeats every 1.5 seconds. "There is a response," the operator shouts. There is a commotion on the ship. The group commander gives the command. "Prepare the divers." Another silence reigns under the water. The bottom is covered with a thick layer of gray silt. In muddy water, visibility is no more than 2 meters. The beam of the flashlight picks out debris from the darkness. Pieces of metal, wires, fragments of panels. Everything looks like the scattered parts of a giant machine. One of the divers points his flashlight down. A cylindrical device about 30 centimeters long, the body of a parametric recorder, is partially pressed into the mud. A piece of orange paint is still visible on it. They carefully pull it out of the ground and raise it to the surface. It is accepted on deck as a relic. People take off their helmets. Someone crosses himself. This small metal block is the only thing that can tell you what happened. But that's only half the mystery. The second recorder, the speech recorder, cannot be found. His tracker must have come off on impact, and now the device is lying somewhere deeper, silently. The search operation continues for several more days. Everything is lifted, from the casing to the turbine fragments. Every little thing is collected on the surface: scraps of documents, parts of the cabin, pieces of belts. All this is put in containers marked evidence. A temporary headquarters is being set up on the shore. Maps, monitors, radio stations, dozens of people in uniform. There are images on the news, ships against the sunset, searchlights flashing in the dark. The host's voice comments dully. The rescue operation in the Java Sea continues. There is no hope of finding survivors. The main goal is to discover all the elements of the aircraft and the recorders. The sea returns the wreckage one by one. Every day, the waves wash up new details on the shore, small but important. For the investigators, this is a puzzle from which to put together the last minutes of the flight. Finally, on January 12th, 3 days after the crash, it was officially announced that the parametric recorder had been found. He is being taken to a laboratory in Jakarta under guard. All the attention is on him now. Only this metal cylinder knows the truth. He recorded every rudder movement, every thrust change, every bank angle. And in his memory is the moment when the plane stopped obeying the laws of aerodynamics. Meanwhile, the second box is still lying at the bottom of the Java Sea. No signal, no sound. He will wait for almost 3 months before people come back here again. Meanwhile, seagulls are flying over the water, the sun is coming out from behind the clouds, and the sea is gradually regaining its usual serenity, as if nothing had happened. But under this surface is the silence of cars and people, locked in 1 second, when the sky and the sea became one and the same for the first time. When the rescuers lifted the first black box to the surface, the sea seemed to exhale. The evening was quiet, with almost no wind. The waves were gently hitting the side of the ship, and in the center of the deck stood a group of people in orange jumpsuits. In their hands is a small cylinder, covered with silt and salt. It weighed only a few kilograms, but this metal stored hundreds of thousands of lines of data inside. The breathing of the aircraft, its rhythm, errors, milliseconds between commands and reactions. Parametric recorder. There was still a faint inscription on its body. Flight data recorder, do not open. No one dared to even wipe the dirt without an order. This box wasn't just a thing, it was a witness. On the night after the discovery, he is taken to the laboratory of the National Transportation Safety Board in Jakarta. In the hall there is cold light, steel tables, the smell of engine oil, and ozone from electrical appliances. There are no emotions here, just numbers, protocols, and caution. The recorder is carefully disassembled. Inside is a memory encased in a durable titanium block that can withstand fire and water pressure. Engineers connect the cables, and the system starts reading the data. The first signals appear on the monitors: curves of lines, values of revolutions, pressures, angles, speeds. They turn chaos into meaning. Every second of the flight is recorded. 1436, takeoff. 1438, climb. Everything looks perfect, until the moment when the left engine starts to reduce thrust. Engineers see how the lines of the two engines, which used to run parallel, diverge. The left one falls down, the right one remains stable. At first, the deviation is minimal, 2%, then more. After 30 seconds, the asymmetry reaches 17%. This is a catastrophic difference. On the screen, the graphs look like a heart monitor that suddenly went haywire. The traction control stopped working synchronously. The system responsible for balancing the engines did not respond. Or she couldn't. The investigators make a note. Error in the left channel of the traction control. They analyze readings based on hundreds of parameters: course, bank angle, speed, rudder position. Everything agrees on one thing. The left engine gradually dropped power. The right pulled harder. The autopilot struggled until it exhausted its capabilities. But the equation is incomplete. There is not enough sound. There are not enough votes. The parameters show that the pilots did nothing for the first few minutes. Why? Didn't they notice? Or did they try, but it was too late? To answer, you need a second recorder, a speech recorder. But he's not here. While the engineering team analyzes the graphs, the second box is still underwater. No beacon, no signal. Days pass, weeks. The sea is silent. The commission publishes a preliminary report. The aircraft collided with the surface of the sea due to loss of control. The exact reasons are being clarified. This is a dry formulation, followed by dozens of sleepless nights. In parallel, the investigators are studying the technical logs of Sriwijaya Air. There, among the lines of handwritten reports, a familiar entry appears. The traction control is unstable. When climbing, the lever of the left engine spontaneously moves backwards. Claim: the date is 2 weeks before the disaster. The same phrase can be found earlier in the entries for November, October, September. The system has repeatedly failed. It was tested, restarted, and sometimes the sensors were replaced. But the malfunction disappeared and returned. This is no longer an accident. This is a known but unresolved bug. The documents say, checked, no abnormalities found. Sometimes this phrase is the beginning of any tragedy. While the engineers in the laboratory are sorting out the lines and tables, the divers go back to sea at the port. More than a month has passed and the second recorder has not been found. There are no signals. The pinger's battery has been exhausted for a long time. The sea is silent. The operation resumes in March. New sonar, new coordinates, dozens of hours underwater again. On March 30th, almost 80 days after the disaster, the operator on the ship suddenly hears a faint metallic response on the sonar. Just one, but regular. The divers are coming down. The depth is 23 meters. The water is muddy, and there is a lot of silt. Visibility is no more than 1.5 meters. They work with their hands, feeling the bottom, until one of them comes across a smooth metal edge. If it pulls, it gets stuck. He lifts the lantern, and a familiar shape grows out of the mud. A small box covered with dirt. Speech recorder. On the ship, when it is lifted, no one says a word. Only the applause, short, dry, but sincere. This box will give voice to the dead flight. In the laboratory, it is connected to a listening system. The sound is hoarse, metallic, but legible. The last 30 minutes of the flight. The first 20 are routine. Radio exchange, standard phrases. Runway 25 right, cleared for takeoff. Climb and maintain 130. Then, click. Autopilot shutdown, warning sounds. Bank angle. Bank angle. The voices are getting more intense. What the... Is the thrust dropping? Keep heading. Pause. A short cry from the co-pilot. And silence. Decryption takes days. Each sound is analyzed in milliseconds. Coincidences with the data from the parametric recorder confirm that the traction control failed 3 minutes before the loss of communication. The left engine spontaneously reduced power, while the right engine remained in dial mode. The pilots didn't notice in time. They monitored the weather, bypassed the thunderstorm. The autopilot compensated for the deviation until the system reached its limit. After turning off the machine, the plane instantly lost stability. The final conclusion of the engineers sounds calm, almost emotionless. The root cause of the incident is an asymmetry of traction due to a malfunction of the traction control. A related factor is the lack of timely response from the crew. But for those who work with this data, numbers are not just numbers. Every second, every sound is the breathing of people that stopped in the middle of the sky. When both recorders return the report to the commission, their cases are placed side by side. 2 small blocks capable of accommodating everything. Takeoff, calm, panic, fall. There is a sign on the wall of the laboratory. SJ182, January 9th, 2021. Outside the windows, it's raining again, and it seems that it washes away the last traces of salt from the metal and the last traces of questions from the memory. But there is only one main question inside the investigators. Why the system, which was known to be malfunctioning, continued to work? And why not a single person pressed the turn off the traction control button on time? In the laboratory, a virtual model of flight SJ182 is displayed on the screen. Black background, white lines, course altitude, thrust of the engines. Every movement of the aircraft is displayed in milliseconds. The investigators watch as the tragedy unfolds in front of them, as if someone is scrolling through a record of life in slow motion. 14:36. Takeoff. 2. CFM56 engines operate synchronously. The curves on the screen run parallel, perfectly matching, like 2 lines of a metronome. 14:38. Climb. Everything is normal. 14:39.01. Desynchronization begins. On the screen, the line of the left engine is slowly creeping down, only by a few percent. But for an airplane, it makes a huge difference. When one engine pushes harder than the other, a torque is created that tends to turn the aircraft towards the weak engine. The physics is simple. The right side pulls forward, the left side lags behind. The plane begins to turn to the left. Under normal conditions, automation should compensate for this by using the rudder. But the autopilot of the Boeing 737 Classic has limited capabilities. It can maintain a roll of up to 19 degrees, no more. Everything above is beyond the scope of the algorithm. The traction automaton is the brain of the system. It reads the parameters of speed, altitude, and tilt angle to adjust the thrust of each engine. But its sensors are aging. The contacts wear out. And that day, the left channel failed. He decided that the left engine was running with excess power and automatically reduced thrust to balance out the performance. In fact, he put the plane in an imbalance. In the diagram, the red line, the left engine, falls down. The green one, the right one, remains flat. The gap between them is growing. On the screen, it looks like a divergence of veins in a living body. The dispatchers below see only a dot on the radar. The pilots are just evenly glowing panels. No alarms. The system does not consider the situation to be an emergency. Everything looks fine. But in the cockpit, the way the pilots feel is gradually changing. The plane seems to move slightly sideways. The commander feels a slight pressure on the pedal, barely noticeable. The co-pilot thinks it's because of the wind. They both continue their rounds of the storm. At this point, the viewer can already see how the arrows on the screen begin to shake. The autopilot struggles by tilting the plane to the right to compensate for a left turn. 19 19.5 to 20 degrees. The system can't go any further. It reaches its physical limit, and the internal servo motors freeze. The autopilot gave up. 14:39:47. The commander notices the roll and turns off the system. A click. AP disengage lights up on the panel. Now the management is completely in human hands. And here's the key point. Everything that happens next is determined by how the brain interprets movement in space. Dense clouds around create the effect of sensory emptiness. There is nothing for the eyes to catch on. The inner ear does not feel acceleration. The pilot's brain does not understand which is up and which is down. This is spatial disorientation, one of the most dangerous conditions in aviation. Afwan sees that the plane is going to the left and pulls the steering wheel to the left towards himself. In a normal position, this would help to align the car. But with a roll of 40-50 degrees, the orientation changes. What seems to be up is actually down. As he struggles with the steering wheel, the left engine loses thrust completely. Its lever slowly creeps back, almost to the minimum mode. The right one, on the contrary, remains at takeoff power. The difference between them becomes critical. The plane turns into a gyroscope, rotating, uncontrollable. On the laboratory monitor, the lines sharply intersect. The course goes to the left, the bank angle increases, the height decreases. All this takes less than a minute. When the commander realizes that the plane is over 60 degrees, he tries to regain control by tilting the steering wheel to the right. But inertia is already insurmountable. Centrifugal force pulls the plane into a spiral. For the co-pilot, the situation looks chaotic. The devices are blinking, and the sound signals merge into a continuous stream. Bank angle, overspeed, altitude. Every system tries to warn the crew, but it's too late. In such conditions, not only physical, but also cognitive overload accumulates. The brain no longer has time to process the data. A person begins to act on instinct. Instinct tells you to pull the wheel. But with a roll of 90 degrees, this movement leads downwards. Aviation psychologists call this the illusion of ascent, when the plane is falling and the body feels the takeoff. The pilot is doing everything right, but in an upside, down world, it turns into a disaster. 14:40:05. The plane turns over almost on its side. The nose droops. The speed reaches 400 knots. 14:40:12. The altitude is less than 1,000 meters. Everything ends in 48 seconds after the autopilot is turned off. On the screen of the laboratory reconstruction, the investigators see the latest parameter values. Look, roll angle is 90 degree. Vertical speed is minus 10,000 feet per minute. Left engine, idle right, 94% thrust. Everything matches the data of the black boxes. There is silence in the hall. No one says out loud what everyone understands. The failure of technology was only the first spark. Everything else was done by a human reaction, natural but fatal. When the crew realized what was happening, there was no more time. Even if they had turned off the thrust control immediately, they would have had to manually synchronize the engines, stabilize the course, and bring the plane out of the bank. All this in a matter of seconds, in clouds, without a horizon. Any mistake at this height is not forgiving. The investigators note, the pilots did not identify the automatic thrust failure. Their attention was focused on bypassing the thunderstorm front. Spatial disorientation and stress prevented them from performing the correct actions. But there is a simple human story behind this formulation. People who used to trust the machine were suddenly left alone against it. In recent decades, aviation has increasingly transferred control to automation. Pilots are less likely to manually control thrust and roll. The system does it better, faster, and more accurately. But any technology has a boundary, and when it goes beyond it, a person must instantly remember how to fly without the help of a computer. That day, that memory came too late. There is a dry but important point in the Commission's report. The automatic traction control failure was not accompanied by an audible warning, which reduced the likelihood of timely detection of the problem. A small detail, one missing signal, and a whole chain of events unfolded in a matter of minutes. In the final visualization, experts show a scheme that is simple but terribly logical. Sensor failure, thrust asymmetry, course deviation, autopilot limit, system shutdown, disorientation, incorrect steering wheel movement, loss of control. Only 8 steps, less than 1 minute. The whole tragedy of Sriwijaya Air Flight 182 fits into these 8 lines. Not malicious intent, not a design disaster, but a combination of small, almost insignificant factors that combine to form an ideal storm. This is the mechanics of tragedy, where metal, electronics, and humans combine into one whole, and one wrong reaction makes the difference between flying and falling. When the screen is turned off in the laboratory, the room is plunged into semi-darkness. 2 recorders remain on the table. They have already said everything that is required of them. Now all that remains is to listen to the silence, in which you can hear the echo of an engine slowly losing thrust, as a reminder that in aviation, even one inconspicuous detail can change the fate of 62 people and an entire country. A year has passed. On the streets of Jakarta, life has long returned to its usual rhythm: traffic jams, heat, the smell of coffee and gasoline. Queues of planes are lining up on the runways again, and the same roar of turbines is heard over the city. But for those who were part of the investigation of Sriwijaya Air Flight 182, the sky will never be the same again. The final report of the National Transportation Safety Board was released in November 2022. A thick folder, hundreds of pages, diagrams, tables, transcripts. At the very beginning of the document is a simple statement. The cause of the disaster was an asymmetry of thrust caused by a malfunction of the automatic thrust control of the left engine. Then it gets drier. The crew did not identify the system failure and did not take the actions required by the Boeing instructions. Just 2 lines, followed by the lives of 62 people. The investigators describe everything chronologically in their report. How an error in the electrical signal caused the engine to reduce power. How the autopilot struggled to stay on course. How pilots who were busy bypassing thunderstorms did not notice the growing asymmetry. And how in just 48 seconds the plane went from stable flight to uncontrolled fall. For engineers, this is a logical chain. It's a tragedy for the world. And although official conclusions have been drawn, the main question remains the same. Why is it that in modern skies, where every system is duplicated, everything is solved by one mistake? The Commission notes, the Boeing 7000E 737 classic automatic traction control is an old generation system. It was developed back in the 1980s and is based on electromechanical components that wear out over time. These planes have been flying for decades, moving from one airline to another, going through hundreds of takeoff and landing cycles. Their technical condition depends not only on age, but also on the discipline of maintenance. Flight SJ182 became a reminder. The age of the aircraft is not a verdict, but every underestimated little thing is a threat. After the publication of the report, Indonesia changed the rules for checking fleets. The traction control is now tested more often than prescribed by the manufacturer. Pilots are trained in manual control in case of system failures, a skill that was once basic, but eventually gave way to trust in automation. Aviation psychologists note that modern pilots are less likely to encounter manual flight in critical conditions. Autopilot does almost everything for them, and when technology fails, the brain does not have time to rebuild. This is the new vulnerability of aviation, dependence on the perfection of machines. A Boeing report released after the crash says, "We regret the loss of flight SJ182 and express our deep sympathy to the families. We continue to cooperate with the Indonesian aviation authorities on safety issues and the improvement of automatic systems." Cold words. No guilt, no emotions. Like everything in this business, they are accurate, verified, but empty. Meanwhile, in the Sriwijaya Air hangar, mechanics are disassembling another Boeing. The same panels, the same appliances, the same sheen of aluminum. People work in silence, but everyone knows that the shadow of Flight 182 already lies on this metal. There is an unwritten rule among airline employees. When a new pilot takes the helm, he is reminded, "If you feel that the car is behaving wrong, trust yourself, not the automation." A small reminder, carved by pain. In the documentary hall where the recorders are stored, there is still a pair, the same parametric in speech. Their cases are cleaned, the polishing is dull, but there is a memory inside. Every rotation of the engine, every word of the crew. These devices are like hearts that continue to beat even after the body has disappeared. Investigators often repeat among themselves, "The technology is perfect, but a person must be more perfect." This is the essence of all aviation. Not in speed, not in height, but in the trust between man and machine. The disaster of Sriwijaya Air Flight 182 was a turning point. The whole world saw how an imperceptible malfunction, a shift of the lever by a few millimeters, triggers a chain reaction. An algorithm error, a second delay, incorrect movement, and everything turns into a spiral that cannot be stopped. In the reports, it sounds dry. Incorrect reaction of the crew to thrust asymmetry. But in reality, this is a story about how fatigue, trust, and routine can overshadow mindfulness, even for the most experienced. Psychologists say that the moment the pilots realized they were losing control, their minds shrank to a simple instinct to level up. It's natural, it's human, and maybe that's why it hurts so much. The tragedy of flight SJ182 did not bring new laws of physics. She only reminded the old truth. The plane does not forgive small things. Not a single bolt, not a single wire, not a single lamp on the dashboard is insignificant. Everything in aviation is subordinated to one idea: predictability. And when at least one element leaves it, order turns into chaos. Now, years later, dozens of planes are flying over the same Java Sea. Their lights are reflected in the water, and every pilot knows that somewhere below the surface lies the wreckage of a flight that has become a lesson for an entire era. The camera rises higher. The sea slowly gives way to the sky. A ray of sunlight breaks through the clouds, and a new Boeing enters it, rising up. Its fuselage glitters, its wings slice through the air, everything seems the same as it was then. Only now there is an invisible knowledge behind every lever. Where is the boundary between automation and man? The voiceover sounds calm, without pathos. There are no small things in aviation. Every detail is a matter of life. And as long as a person remembers this, heaven will be a safe place. The camera goes up, the plane's wake disappears into the clouds, and all that remains is the soft hum of the turbines, the sound that started it all.